The Aztec civilization rose and fell rather quickly in just 2 centuries. From the 14th to the 16th century, this people created an empire in central Mexico known for conquest and human sacrifice. But there were also many strange things about their culture. For example, prostitutes here followed the horoscope, and as a punishment for masturbation, they smeared their genitals with chili peppers. Women were equal to men in many ways, and traitors were executed with particular cruelty as violators of the world order. In the harsh world of the Aztecs, women were not treated so badly. In fact, it can be argued that there was a kind of equality within the family. For example, if a woman died in childbirth, she was honored in the same way as a warrior killed in battle. Older women were also honored and often became matchmakers, coming to the bride's house to negotiate the marriage. One of these matchmakers would carry the bride on her back to the groom's house and tie his cloak to the girl's cloak, declaring them husband and wife. Married life began with a severe ordeal. As the historian Kirill Reznikov writes in his book Desires of the Flesh, Food and Sex in People's Lives, the newlyweds would sit in their room and pray for 4 days after the wedding, coming out only at noon and midnight to light aromatic resins on the family altar. Only on the 5th day were they allowed to begin their marital duties. In addition to a wife, a man could have as many concubines as he could support. Of course, this was mostly the privilege of rulers, their assistants, and wealthy warriors. The children of these concubines could not claim inheritance, but they did not have a stigma of illegitimacy on their reputation, as in most other cultures. There is a known case of a man named Itzcoatl, who was the son of one of the concubines, becoming a Tlatoani ruler. The Aztecs were very strict about adultery. Those caught in the act were killed. The lover's head was crushed with a stone, while the mistress was first strangled and had her head pierced. But first the husband had to prove the adultery. His words alone were not enough. Witnesses were needed. It is worth noting that if a jealous man caught his wife cheating on him and killed her himself, he would also be killed. In general, a cuckold had the right to demand his wife's execution, but not to kill her. Even members of the upper classes were executed for adultery. The French anthropologist Jacques Cousteau, in his book Daily Life of the Aztecs on the Eve of the Spanish Conquest, tells the story of an Aztec princess who became one of the wives of the ruler of Texcoco, Nezahualpilli. The girl turned out to be cruel and perverse. When she liked a young man, she would lure him into bed and then order him to be killed and a statue made to look like him. She told her husband that they were statues of her gods. When the deception was discovered and she was caught with 3 lovers at once, all 4 of them, as well as their accomplice servants, were publicly executed. Any manifestation of homosexuality was also severely punished. Lesbians were simply strangled, but men were treated much more harshly. According to some sources, a man who played an active role was hanged. According to others, he was stabbed. The passive partners suffered an even worse fate. His intestines were removed through his anus. The researcher Mariana Aregui, in her article Sexuality and Eroticism in the Aztecs, suggests that such cruelty was considered necessary by the Aztecs because, according to their beliefs, sex created harmony and any deviation from accepted social norms destroyed the balance of forces in the world. It could only be restored by the agonizing death of the offender. The Aztecs had a dual attitude towards the act of self-satisfaction in men. On the one hand, one of the most revered gods in the Aztec pantheon, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl, masturbated and, after spreading his semen on a rock, created a bat. The animal immediately became very active. It flew to the goddess of love, flowers and fertility, Xochiquetzal, and bit her genitals. Flowers immediately sprouted from the wound, which the restless mouse took to the underworld and gave to the lord Mictlantecuhtli, who perfumed them. This is how, according to legend, the fragrant flowers came into being. But if divine masturbation ended up creating something good, teenage masturbation could end up much worse. There is evidence that when boys were caught in the act, the object of their disobedience was smeared with hot chili peppers to discourage any desire to touch it. However, the source of this information is the historical novelist Gary Jennings, who mentions such a custom in his fiction book, Aztec, so we cannot fully trust such information. However, the Aztecs at least had a custom of punishing delinquent children by holding them over a fire in which chili peppers were burnt. Aztec attitudes to prostitution were also ambivalent. The Spanish monk Bernardino de Sahagin, in his Florentine Codex, describes how mothers taught their daughters not to paint their faces or walk in public places so as not to look like prostitutes. On the other hand, the researcher Ulysses Chavez Jimenez, in his article, How Much Is Your Love Worth? Aztec Prostitution, speaks of the important sacred significance of prostitutes in Aztec life. He also deciphers the name of the representatives of the oldest profession. The Aztecs called prostitutes ahuenemi, which translates as bringing joy. According to the same Sanagan, these girls let their hair down, painted their faces and teeth, and constantly chewed gum to freshen their breath. Respectable married women were forbidden to chew gum in public and had to wear their hair up. Sahagin describes a custom in which priestesses of the goddess Xochiquetzal, who was also the patroness of prostitutes, were given to warriors who were particularly heroic on a battlefield. But their functions did not end there. Kirill Reznikov, in his book mentioned above, tells about the hard schools, Telpochkali, where young men of unknown origin were trained in crafts and martial arts. In their life of trials and tribulations, there was only one relaxation. At sunset, they could avail themselves of the services of the bringer of joy. Prostitutes also often performed religious functions. At festivals honoring the gods Tenochtitlan and Huitzilopochtli, young warriors danced around Ahuameni, and at events marking the beginning of the rainy season. Anthropologist Ross Hasek writes in his book, Polygamy, The Rise and Fall of the Aztec Empire, that the Aztecs did not become prostitutes by choice, but by horoscope. It was believed that a girl born on the day of Xochitl would become a skilled embroiderer, or impoverished and become a prostitute, and a girl born on the day of Kali would have a very unenviable fate. She would certainly become idle and fall into the position of a prostitute or slave. 4 concubines were also chosen from the Ahuanemi for the young man who was to be sacrificed afterwards. As both sex and human sacrifice permeated the life of the Aztec Empire, they could not help but intersect. To celebrate the annual festival of Toxcatl, the most handsome and well-built young man was selected from among the captives and made the earthly representative of a deity. For 1 year he was fed with selected foods, dressed in the best clothes, and given 4 concubines 20 days before the ceremony. Each of them represented one of the Aztec goddesses: Xilunin, Xochiquetzal, Atlantonin, and Huixtocihuatl. And on a festive day, the young man was taken to the pyramid to have his heart torn out. But even this was not the strictest ritual. Another was dedicated to the already mentioned goddess Xochiquetzal. For her feast, a beautiful virgin was chosen to symbolize this goddess. Then she would marry a warrior who symbolized another god, Tezcatlipoca. They lived together for a year, and then the girl was killed and skinned, and the priest of the goddess put on this nightmarish costume and sat at the lute. His followers danced around him, piercing their tongues and confessing their sins. There is an even more monstrous version of this ritual. The future victim was given to the ruler Tlatoani for sexual pleasure and then skinned alive. Whichever version is closest to the original, there is only one conclusion to be drawn: do not go to Aztec festivals.